The clinking of silver forks against fine china didn't just stop. It was strangled into silence. In the VIP section of the Gilded Obsidian, a room where billionaires usually bargained for politicians, the air had turned so cold you could see your breath. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the man sitting at the head of the center table, Don Salvatore Moretti. He had just slapped a waiter for pouring the wine with the wrong hand. Security guards reached for their jackets. The restaurant manager was sweating through his suit. And then Eleanor, the terrified waitress nobody ever noticed, stepped forward. She didn't apologize in English. She didn't speak in Italian. She opened her mouth and spoke a dialect that had been dead for 40 years. A dialect that made the godfather drop his cane and stare at her like he had seen a ghost. The Gilded Obsidian was not merely a restaurant. It was a theater of war disguised as a dining establishment. Located in the beating heart of Manhattan, hidden behind velvet ropes and security scanners that cost more than most family homes, it was where the city's true power brokers came to feed. Elena Rossi knew her place in this ecosystem. She was the krill. Table 7 needs water. Table 4 needs bread. And for the love of God, Elena, stop looking at your shoes. Arthur, the floor manager, hissed into her ear. He grabbed her shoulder with a grip that was tight enough to bruise, steering her toward the kitchen doors. The Moretti reservation is in 20 minutes. If you embarrass me tonight, you won't just be fired. In this town with these people, you'll be unhireable. Elena nodded, her dark curls falling over her eyes, shielding her expression. Yes, Arthur. I understand. Good. Now stay out of the VIP circle. I have Julian and Sarah handling the Moretti table. You stick to the overflow. You're two. Arthur waved a hand vaguely at her face, which was devoid of makeup and framed by messy hair. You're too mousy for the main event. Elena didn't argue. She preferred being the mouse. Mice survived because nobody looked at them. In a city like New York, invisibility was a superpower. At 23, Elena had spent her entire life perfecting the art of fading into the background. She wore her uniform a size too big, kept her head down, and spoke only when spoken to. But beneath the oversized vest and the trembling hands, Eleanor carried a secret history, a history she had been running from since she was a child. She moved through the dining room with the silent grace of a phantom. She refilled wine glasses without interrupting conversations about insider trading. She replaced silverware before the diners even realized they had dropped it. She was excellent at her job specifically because she had no ego. Did you hear Dole? The sous-chef, a frantic man named Benoit, whispered as Eleanor entered the kitchen to grab a tray of appetizers. The old man is coming tonight, not just Lorenzo, Don Salvatore. The kitchen went quiet. The line cooks stopped chopping. Even the dishwasher paused. I thought he was in Sicily, one of the runners muttered. I thought he was dying. Men like Salvatore Moretti don't die, Benoit said, wiping his brow. They just wait for hell to freeze over so they can take over management down there. Listen to me, everything must be perfect. If the risotto is salty, we are dead. If the steak is cold, we are dead. Elena picked up the tray of oysters. Her hands were steady, unlike the others. She knew something they didn't. She knew that men like Salvatore Moretti didn't care about the salt in the risotto. They cared about respect. She walked back out onto the floor. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. It was subtle, like the drop in barometric pressure before a tornado. The regular billionaires, the tech moguls, and the hedge fund managers were hurriedly asking for their checks. They knew the hierarchy of predators. When the lions were coming to the watering hole, the gazelles cleared out. Elena cleared a table near the back, her eyes flickering toward the front entrance. She felt a strange pull in her chest, a mixture of dread and a bizarre magnetic nostalgia. It had been years since she had heard the accents of her childhood. Elena. Arthur snapped his fingers at her from across the room. "The back station, now. Stay out of sight." She retreated to the shadows near the service station, clutching a water pitcher. She made herself small. She watched the door. At 8:00 p.m., exactly the heavy oak doors swung open. They didn't just open, they seemed to yield. 4 men in dark suits entered first. They wore earpieces and moved with the synchronized lethality of a wolf pack. They scanned the room, their eyes lingering on the exits, the kitchen, the guests. Then they stepped aside. Lorenzo Moretti walked in. He was undeniably striking tall, with shoulders that filled out his bespoke Brioni suit, and a face that could have graced the cover of GQ if it weren't for the terrifying coldness in his eyes. He was the prince of the city, the man who had modernized the family business, turning blood money into real estate empires. He looked bored, dangerous, and incredibly weary. But the room didn't freeze for Lorenzo. It froze for the man leaning on his arm. Don Salvatore Moretti was smaller than his son, shrunken by age, but his presence was suffocating. He wore a fedora and a long cashmere coat. His face was a map of deep canyons and scars telling stories of a Sicily that no longer existed, a Sicily of honor, silence, and blood feuds. He walked with a cane, but everyone knew the cane was a prop. If he wanted to, he could still crush a man's windpipe with his bare hands. As they moved toward the VIP section, a raised platform separated by velvet ropes, the entire restaurant went silent. No forks clinked, no glasses chimed. It was the silence of absolute fear. Arthur the manager bowed so low he nearly hit his head on the hostess stand. "Don Salvatore, Mr. Moretti, it is the greatest honor of my life to welcome you to the Gilded Obsidian." Salvatore didn't look at him. He just grunted and kept walking. Lorenzo offered a polite, predatory nod. "The table. Is it ready?" "Of course, sir. The best table. Secluded. Private." Arthur scrambled to lead them. Elena watched from the shadows. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She saw the way Salvatore walked a specific gait favoring his left leg. She remembered that limp. Not from him, but from stories. Stories her grandmother used to tell her late at night, whispering in a dialect that she said was the language of ghosts. He walks like a man carrying the weight of the old country, Elena thought. The group sat. The bodyguards took positions at the corners of the platform. Lorenzo sat on his father's right. Arthur snapped his fingers, and the server he had assigned, a young, arrogant man named Chad, rushed forward with the wine list. Elena felt a cold pit in her stomach. Chad was good at upselling champagne to tourists, but he didn't know this world. He didn't know that you never approached the table until the Don removed his hat. He didn't know that you never offered the wine list to the son before the father. Chad stepped up to the table, a bright plastic smile on his face. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Chad, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start us off with some sparkling water, or perhaps a cocktail?" Salvatore slowly took off his hat and set it on the empty chair beside him. He looked at Chad. He didn't speak. Lorenzo sighed, rubbing his temple. "Just water. Still, and bring the wine list to me." Chad, eager to please but fundamentally misunderstanding the dynamic, chuckled. "Actually, sir, we have a fantastic Pinot Noir that pairs excellently with the—" "Boy," Salvatore said. His voice was like grinding stones. "Do I look like I drink Pinot Noir?" Chad froze. "I'm sorry, sir. I just meant—" "Go!" Salvatore waved a hand, a dismissive gesture usually reserved for stray dogs. Chad paled and backed away. Arthur, watching from the sidelines, looked like he was about to have a stroke. He hissed at Chad, "Get out of there! Send Dominic!" Dominic, a more seasoned waiter, buttoned his jacket and approached. But the mood was already ruined. Salvatore was frowning, tapping his fingers on the white tablecloth. The rhythm was erratic, agitated. Elena watched, unable to look away. She knew that rhythm. It wasn't just tapping. He was agitated, because the air in the restaurant was too recycled, the music was too modern, and the respect was too synthetic. He was a man out of time, and he hated it. "He wants bread," Elena whispered to herself. "But not the sourdough. He wants the hard crust." She saw Dominic pour the water. He poured from the left side. Elena winced. Wrong side. Salvatore's hand shot out and gripped Dominic's wrist. The movement was a blur. The water pitcher rattled. "In my house," Salvatore said, his voice rising, silencing the room again. "You pour with the right hand. The left hand is for the devil." Dominic stammered, terrified. "I apologize, Don Moretti. It's just restaurant policy to—" "Policy." Salvatore slammed his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. "I come here for dinner, not for policy. You treat me like a tourist. You think I am some American tourist." Lorenzo placed a hand on his father's arm. "Papa, basta. It's fine." "It is not fine." Salvatore stood up, his face reddening. "This place, it has no soul. It has no memory." He looked ready to storm out, or worse, have his guards dismantle the place brick by brick. Arthur was paralyzed. Security was moving in. The tension was a physical weight crushing the room. Elena didn't think. She didn't calculate. Her body moved before her brain could stop it. She grabbed a basket of the rustic hard-crust bread that was reserved for the staff meal, the stuff that was actually authentic, and a bottle of simple olive oil. She walked out of the shadows. The click of Elena's sensible work shoes on the marble floor sounded like gunshots in the silence. She could feel Arthur's eyes boring into the back of her skull. He was going to fire her. He was probably going to kill her. But she couldn't let the old man leave angry. It wasn't just about the restaurant. It was a deep, ancestral imperative. You did not let a guest leave your home with a heavy heart. She bypassed the security guards. One of them, a massive man with a scar over his lip, stepped in to block her path. Elena didn't stop. She looked him in the eye and tilted her head slightly, a gesture of deference, but determination. "I have bread," she whispered. The guard hesitated. He saw no weapon, only a small, trembling waitress with a basket of bread. He stepped aside. Elena approached the table. Lorenzo looked up, his eyes narrowing. He was used to women trying to get his attention, models, actresses, socialites. He had never seen a woman who looked like she wanted to be invisible while standing in the center of a spotlight. She didn't look at Lorenzo. She didn't look at the bodyguards. She looked only at Salvatore. The old man was still standing, his chest heaving with indignation. He looked at this small girl who had dared to interrupt his rage. "Who are you?" Salvatore barked. "Another one with policy." Elena set the basket down. She didn't put it in the center. She placed it directly in front of him. She poured the oil into a small dish, not the fancy truffle oil the restaurant pushed, but the plain greenish gold oil from the back. Then she did the unthinkable. She reached out and moved his wine glass 3 inches to the right, aligning it perfectly with the knife. Arthur gasped audibly from the sidelines. Elena took a breath. The air in the room felt thick like underwater. She knew that if she spoke English, she was just a waitress. If she spoke Italian, she was just a pretender. She had to go deeper. She had to go back to the village, to the dirt roads and the blood oaths. She clasped her hands in front of her apron, dropped her chin and spoke. Voscenza benedica donturi, upani e cavuru, mancia e scorda I dolori. The words hung in the air. It wasn't Italian. It wasn't even standard Sicilian. It was a specific archaic dialect from the Corleone Mountains, a phrasing used by peasants to greet a feudal lord before the wars. It translated roughly to, "Your Excellency, bless me. The bread is warm. Eat and forget your sorrows." The effect was instantaneous. Don Salvatore's eyes went wide. The rage evaporated, replaced by a shock so profound he looked like he had been slapped. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Lorenzo stiffened. He looked from his father to the waitress. He had never heard anyone address his father as Don Turi, the intimate old-world diminutive of Salvatore, and lived to tell about it. "What did you say?" Salvatore whispered. His voice trembled, stripped of its thunder. Elena didn't retreat. She knew the rules now. She was in the circle. "I said the bread is warm, Don Turi. It is bad luck to let warm bread go cold while anger heats the blood." She spoke in the same dialect. Heavy, guttural, ancient. Salvatore reached out a shaking hand. He didn't reach for the bread. He reached toward her face, stopping just inches away, as if testing to see if she was a hallucination. "Where?" Salvatore choked out. "Where did you learn that tongue? Nobody speaks the Arberesce of the valley anymore. They are all dead, or they are all Americanized." "My grandmother," Elena said softly, switching to English but keeping the cadence of the dialect. "She taught me. She said it was the only way to speak to God, and to men who think they are God." A pin drop could have been heard in the restaurant. Lorenzo let out a short, incredulous breath. A small smile, one of genuine fascination, tugged at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Elena with new eyes. She wasn't a mouse anymore. She was a puzzle. Salvatore stared at her for a long second, analyzing her face, her bone structure, the shape of her eyes. He was looking for ghosts. "Your grandmother," Salvatore said. "What was her name?" Elena hesitated. This was the dangerous part, but she had gone too far to lie. "Grazia. Grazia Vitale." The name hit the table like a grenade. Salvatore's face went pale. He gripped the edge of the table. "Grazia," he whispered. The name seemed to physically pain him. "The baker's daughter, the one who disappeared in 74. Elena nodded. "She didn't disappear, Don Turi. She ran. She came here. She baked bread in Brooklyn for 30 years until she died." Salvatore closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out of the corner of his eye, a sight that would have terrified his enemies more than his gun. The crying of a monster is a terrible thing to witness. He opened his eyes and looked at the bread basket. He broke off a piece of the crust. He dipped it in the oil. He took a bite. He chewed slowly, closing his eyes again. "It tastes like home," he mumbled. He opened his eyes and looked at Arthur, who was cowering by the hostess stand. "You!" Salvatore roared, pointing a finger at the manager. Arthur jumped. Yes, Don Salvatore." "This girl," Salvatore gestured to Eleanor. "She is not a waitress tonight. Tonight she eats with us." Arthur's jaw dropped. "Sir, that's against protocol. Staff cannot." Lorenzo cut in his voice, smooth and deadly. "Arthur, my father just invited a lady to dinner. Are you telling him no?" No, of course not," Arthur squeaked. "Elena, please, sit." Elena froze. "I can't. My shift." Lorenzo stood up. He walked around the table. He was taller than she expected, and he smelled of expensive tobacco and rain. He pulled out the chair between him and his father. "Elena," Lorenzo said, his voice low, vibrating in her chest. "Nobody says no to Don Salvatore. And honestly," he looked her up and down, his dark eyes sparkling with a dangerous curiosity. "I really want to know how a 23-year-old waitress in Manhattan knows the dialect of a village that hasn't existed on a map since World War II. Please, sit. Elena looked at the chair. It was a trap. She knew it. By sitting there, she was entering their world. She was exposing herself. But looking at the old man who was looking at her as if she were a resurrected saint, she knew she couldn't refuse. She untied her apron. She dropped it on the waiter station. She smoothed her skirt. And she sat down at the table of the Mafia King. The dinner that followed was surreal. The entire restaurant watched in covert silence as the shy waitress broke bread with the Moretti crime family. Salvatore was transformed. He asked her about the recipes Grazia had taught her. He asked if she knew the songs of the harvest. He asked about the specific way to dry tomatoes in the sun. He didn't ask about her life in America. He only cared about the connection to the past. Elena answered every question, her confidence growing. When she spoke the dialect, she wasn't Elena the waitress. She was the granddaughter of Grazia Vitale. She had dignity. Lorenzo, however, was quiet. He ate slowly, his eyes never leaving Elena. He wasn't interested in tomatoes. He was analyzing her. "So," Lorenzo said during a lull in the conversation. He poured wine into her glass. Tinanello, a vintage older than she was. "Grazia Vitale runs away in 1974. My father was what a captain back then. A soldier, Salvatore, corrected his voice nostalgic. I was a soldier for the Corleonesi." "Right." Lorenzo continued swirling his wine. "She runs away. Why, people didn't just leave the village back then, Elena. Unless they were chased." Eleanor's grip on her fork tightened. She wanted a different life. She didn't want to be a baker's daughter forever. "That's a lie," Lorenzo said casually. He took a sip of wine. "But that's okay. You have beautiful eyes when you lie." Elena flushed. "I'm not lying." "You are." Lorenzo leaned in closer. Grazia Vitale didn't run because she was bored. She ran because she saw something, or she took something. Salvatore slammed his hand on the table, making Elena jump. "Lorenzo, leave the girl alone. We are eating." "I'm just making conversation." "Papa," Lorenzo said, a shark-like grin appearing. "I'm trying to figure out why the granddaughter of a runaway baker speaks a dialect that is used as a code by the old guard." Elena's blood ran cold. He knew. "It's not a code," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's just language." "It was a language," Lorenzo corrected. "Now it's a shibboleth, a password. Only the families from the inner circle kept it alive to talk business without the feds understanding. My father taught it to me. His father taught it to him. But a baker, no. A baker wouldn't know the formal greeting you used. Voscenza benedica. That is what you say to a don. That is not what you say to a customer." Lorenzo's gaze was piercing. He wasn't charmed by the folklore like his father. He was suspicious. "Who are you really, Elena?" Lorenzo asked softly. Before Elena could answer, the air in the restaurant changed again. The heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant burst open. This time it wasn't a respectful entrance. 6 men walked in. They wore leather jackets and jeans, too casual for the gilded obsidian. They were loud, they were Russian. At the center was a man named Dmitry Volkov. He was a brute of a man known for running the ports in New Jersey. He had been encroaching on Moretti territory for months. The music didn't stop this time. It was drowned out by the heavy boots of the Russians. Security moved to intercept, but Volkov held up a hand. "Relax, boys. I am just here for a drink." He spotted the Moretti table. A cruel smile spread across his face. He walked straight toward the VIP platform, ignoring the maitre d'. Salvatore didn't turn around. He kept buttering his bread. But his hand had stopped moving. "Don Salvatore," Volkov boomed, his voice grating. "I didn't know you were back in town and having dinner with the help." He sneered at Elena. Lorenzo stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. Dimitri, you're interrupting my father's meal. That's a health hazard. I just wanted to pay respects. Volkov laughed, stepping onto the platform. His men fanned out behind him. The Moretti bodyguards stepped forward, hands inside their jackets. The restaurant was a powder keg. One wrong move, and the china would be replaced by shell casings. Volkov looked at Elena. Pretty thing. Is this the new mistress, Lorenzo, or just the dessert? He reached out a hand to touch Elena's hair. It happened in a blur. Lorenzo grabbed Volkov's wrist mid-air. The sound of the grip was audible bone, grinding against bone. Touch her, Lorenzo whispered, his voice deadly calm, and you will lose the hand, then the arm, then the head. Volkov grimaced, trying to pull his hand back, but Lorenzo's grip was iron. You protect the waitress now, Moretti. You're getting soft. She is not a waitress, Salvatore said. The old man stood up. He turned slowly to face Volkov. He looked small compared to the Russian giant, but his eyes were black holes. She is a guest at my table, Salvatore said, and she is of Sicilian blood, specifically the blood of Corleone. Salvatore looked at Elena, then back at Volkov. And in Sicily, Salvatore continued, we have a saying for men who interrupt a meal. Elena knew the saying. She whispered it without thinking in the dialect. Cu disturbulu pani mori di fame. He who disturbs the bread dies of hunger. Salvatore smiled, a terrifying cold smile. Exactly. He nodded to his security. Remove this trash from my dining room. The Moretti guards drew their weapons. The Russians hesitated. They were outgunned, and they knew it. Volkov yanked his arm free from Lorenzo, rubbing his wrist. He glared at Elena with pure venom. This isn't over, Moretti, Volkov spat. And you, girl, you picked the wrong side. The Russians retreated, backing out of the restaurant. The tension slowly drained, leaving the diners shaking. Lorenzo sat back down, smoothing his suit. He looked at Elena. His expression had changed. The suspicion was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Respect and possessiveness. You speak the threats well, too, Lorenzo said quietly. Who taught you that one? Elena looked at her hands. My father. Lorenzo paused. I thought you said your grandmother raised you. She did, Elena whispered, after my father was killed. Who was your father? Salvatore asked. His voice was urgent now. Elena looked up. She looked at Salvatore, then at Lorenzo. She knew there was no going back to being invisible. The Russians had seen her face. She was marked. My father, Elena said, her voice trembling but clear, was Santino Vitale. But you probably knew him as the Ghost. Salvatore dropped his fork. It clattered loudly onto the plate. Santino! Salvatore gasped. My best friend. My consigliere. The man who betrayed me in '85. Elena shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. He didn't betray you, Don Turi. He died protecting your secrets. He died protecting you. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. The history of 20 years of blood and betrayal sat between the coffee cups. Lorenzo looked at Elena. He realized suddenly why she looked familiar. She had his father's eyes, not biologically, but she had the eyes of the family. If that is true, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a whisper, then you are not safe here. Not in this restaurant. Not in this city. He stood up and offered her his hand. Come with us. Where? Elena asked, her heart racing. To the fortress, Lorenzo said, because now that Volkov has seen you, and now that my father knows who you are, the most valuable target in New York. Elena looked at the hand. It was a strong hand, a killer's hand. but it was the only hand offering to pull her out of the cage. She took it. The drive from Manhattan to the Moretti estate in the Hamptons was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and suffocating silence. Elena sat in the back of the armored SUV, sandwiched between Lorenzo and the door. Salvatore sat in the front passenger seat, staring out into the darkness, lost in the memories of 1985. The fortress, as Lorenzo had called it, was not a house. It was a compound, built on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by 12-foot walls topped with sensors. As the iron gates groaned open, Eleanor felt a finality settle in her chest. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was something else, something undefined and dangerous. "Welcome to Purgatory," Lorenzo murmured as the car came to a halt in the cobblestone courtyard. Inside the house was a museum of cold marble and dark mahogany. It was beautiful, but it lacked the warmth of the bakery she had grown up in. It lacked the smell of yeast and vanilla. Here the air smelled of lemon polish and gun oil. "Take her to the East Wing." Salvatore ordered the house staff an older woman named Maria, who looked like she had seen too many bodies buried in the garden. "Get her clothes that fit. Burn that uniform." "No," Elena said. Her voice was quiet, but it echoed in the cavernous foyer. Lorenzo stopped halfway up the stairs. He turned, looking down at her. "No, I keep the uniform," Elena said, clutching the hem of her cheap black skirt. "It reminds me of who I am when the world isn't looking. And," she hesitated, "my name tag. It has my grandmother's handwriting on the back." Lorenzo walked back down the stairs, step by slow step. He stopped in front of her, towering over her petite frame. The air between them crackled with a strange electricity fear mixed with an undeniable attraction. "You are stubborn," Lorenzo said softly. "Like your father." "You didn't know him," Elena countered. "I knew of him," Lorenzo corrected. "He was the only man my father ever trusted, and the only man who broke his heart. If you are his daughter, you have dangerous blood, Elena. Blood that betrays." "He didn't betray anyone," she insisted, her eyes flashing. "He was framed. Grazia told me everything before she died. She gave me the proof." Salvatore spun around his cane, clacking loudly on the floor. "Proof what proof?" Elena bit her lip. She had said too much. "She gave me a key. She said it opens the truth. But I never knew what it was for. I just kept it safe." "Where is it?" Lorenzo demanded, his voice sharpening. "It's sewn into the lining of my winter coat," Elena whispered. "Back at my apartment in Queens." Lorenzo cursed under his breath. "Queens, we have to go back. If Volkov knows who you are, his men are already tearing your apartment apart." "Tonight is too dangerous," Salvatore interjected. "Volkov is hunting. We wait until dawn. We plan." He looked at Elena with a mixture of sadness and hope. "Go with Maria. Rest. Tomorrow we find out if my best friend was a traitor or a martyr." That night, Elena lay in a bed that cost more than her entire education. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, but she couldn't sleep. She walked to the balcony, the wind whipping her hair. She sensed him before she saw him. Lorenzo was standing on the adjacent balcony, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his tie undone. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, not looking at her. "Snipers." "You're out here," she replied. "I'm harder to kill." He turned to face her. The moonlight softened the harsh angles of his face. "Why did you stay hidden for so long if you knew who you were?" "Because I wanted a life," Elena said honestly. "I wanted to be Elena the waitress, not Elena the mafia princess. I saw what this life did to my grandmother. She was always afraid. Every knock at the door she jumped. I didn't want that. And now, Lorenzo asked, stepping closer to the railing that separated them. Now I'm in a fortress with the Prince of New York, she said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. I guess destiny is persistent. Lorenzo stared at her. For the first time, he didn't see a liability. He saw a woman of immense courage, a woman who had walked into the lion's den with a basket of bread to save an old man's dignity. You're not a Princess Elena, Lorenzo said, his voice rough. You're a queen in hiding, and I'm going to help you get your crown back. The dawn brought a grey, steel-coloured sky. The convoy left the estate at 5:00 a.m. 3 SUVs, heavy security. Elena rode with Lorenzo again. He was checking a semi-automatic pistol, sliding the magazine in with a practiced click. Do you know how to use one? He asked, holding it out. Elena looked at the gun. No. I know how to use a paring knife and a corkscrew. Lorenzo smirked, a genuine expression that momentarily lit up his dark eyes. Deadly in the right hands. But today, stick to me. If I move, you move. If I drop you, run. I don't run, Elena said quietly. They reached her apartment building in Queens an hour later. It was a run-down brick building near the subway tracks. The street was quiet, too quiet. Stay in the car, Lorenzo ordered the driver. Team 2 cover the exits. Team 1 on me. They moved up the stairwell, silent shadows. When they reached the 4th floor, Elena's heart sank. Her door was already ajar. The wood was splintered around the lock. Stay behind me, Lorenzo signaled. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun. The apartment was destroyed. The mattress was slashed. The drawers emptied. The few pictures on the walls smashed. It looked like a hurricane of rage had passed through. They were looking for it, Lorenzo whispered. Elena rushed to the closet. It was empty. Her clothes were scattered on the floor, shredded. My coat, she gasped, dropping to her knees, frantically sifting through the pile of fabric. It was a grey wool coat. It's gone. Lorenzo scanned the room. Volkov's men. They beat us to it. No. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. That key, it was the only thing I had left of them. Suddenly the radio on Lorenzo's shoulder crackled. Boss, we have movement on the roof, and black SUVs pulling up downstairs. It's a trap. Ambush, Lorenzo yelled. Move now. Bullets shredded the window glass before he finished the sentence. Lorenzo tackled Elena, covering her body with his own, as debris rained down on them. The sound was deafening. The sharp crack of sniper fire mixed with the roar of automatic weapons from the street below. The fire escape! Lorenzo shouted, dragging her up. Go! They scrambled out the back window onto the rusted metal grate. Below in the alley, Russian mercenaries were pouring out of vans. Up! Lorenzo commanded. We go to the roof. We jump to the next building. I can't jump that, Elena screamed over the gunfire. You can if you want to live. They sprinted up the iron stairs. A bullet pinged off the railing, inches from Elena's hand. She didn't scream. She just focused on Lorenzo's back. He was her shield. They reached the roof. The gap between her building and the next was 6 feet. A terrifying drop to the concrete alley below. I throw you, Lorenzo said, grabbing her waist. You catch the ledge. I follow. Lorenzo, look out! Elena screamed. A man had emerged from the roof access door behind them, a massive Russian with a scar across his eye. He raised a shotgun. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He spun, shielding Elena, and took the blast. The impact threw him backward, but his Kevlar vest absorbed the buckshot. He groaned, winded, but fired his pistol 3 times. The Russian fell. Lorenzo! Elena cried, grabbing his arm. I'm fine. He gritted out, though his face was pale. Jump, now. He grabbed her and threw her across the gap. She landed hard on the gravel of the adjacent roof, rolling to break the fall. She scrambled up, turning back. Lorenzo leaped. He landed heavily, favoring his left side. He was hurt. "Come on," she said, adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she had. She grabbed his good arm and pulled him up. They ran across the rooftops, the sounds of sirens wailing in the distance. They found a fire escape on the far side of the block and descended into a chaotic market street, blending into the morning crowd. They slumped into a narrow alleyway behind a bodega, gasping for air. Lorenzo leaned against the brick wall, sliding down until he was sitting. He checked his ribs. Broken, definitely. But the vest had saved his life. "We lost it," Lorenzo said, closing his eyes. "The key. The proof. It's gone. Volkov wins." Elena looked at him. She looked at the blood seeping from a cut on his forehead. She reached out and wiped it away gently with her thumb. "No," she said softly. "He doesn't win." Lorenzo opened his eyes. "They took the coat, Elena." Elena reached down to her shoe. She unlaced her sturdy work boot, the ugly, non-slip shoes Arthur hated. She pulled the sole back. There was a small slit in the rubber. She pulled out a small silver key. Lorenzo stared at it, then at her. He started to laugh, a wheezing, painful sound. "You said it was in the coat." "I lied," Elena said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "My grandmother taught me, never keep your diamonds in the jewelry box. Keep them in the flour jar, or in this case, the shoe." Lorenzo looked at her with pure awe. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something much more potent. He reached up and cupped her face with his hand. His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You are incredible," he whispered. "You are absolutely terrifying." He pulled her down to him. The kiss was desperate, tasting of dust and blood and survival. It wasn't the kiss of a prince and a waitress. It was the kiss of two soldiers in a trench. When they broke apart, breathless, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "Where does the key go, Elena?" "The First National Bank in downtown," she said. "Box 404, Santino Vitale's insurance policy." Getting into the bank was the easy part. Getting out would be the war. Lorenzo called in the cavalry. By the time they reached Wall Street, the area was swarming with Moretti soldiers disguised as civilians. Salvatore had mobilized the entire family. This was the end game. They entered the bank vault. The air was cool and smelled of old paper. The bank manager, terrified by Lorenzo's presence, left them alone in the private viewing room. Elena's hand trembled as she inserted the silver key into box 404. Lorenzo turned the second key the bank provided. The box slid out. Inside there was no money. There were no diamonds. There was a single leather-bound ledger and a cassette tape. "The 80s, Lorenzo muttered. "Of course it's a tape." They didn't have a player, but they opened the ledger. Lorenzo scanned the pages. His eyes widened. "My God, this isn't just about the stolen shipment in 85. This is everything. Santino was tracking Volkov's dealings with the feds. Look." He pointed to a column of dates. "Volkov wasn't just stealing from my father. He was an informant. He was selling out the other families to the FBI to clear the path for his own empire. He framed your father because Santino found out." "My father was a hero," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He died to protect the Omerta. To protect your father." "We have to show this to the commission," Lorenzo said, his voice hard. "If the other families see this, Volkov is a dead man walking. The Russians will be purged from the city. We can't just show them," Elena said, her mind racing. "Volkov is too strong now. He'll claim it's fake. We need to make him confess." "How?" Elena looked at the ledger, then at Lorenzo. "Tonight. The Gilded Obsidian. It's the anniversary of the restaurant's opening. Every boss in the city will be there. Volkov will be there to gloat." And "And I'm going to serve him dinner," Elena said coldly. The Gilded Obsidian was closed to the public that night. It was a private event. The air was thick with cigar smoke and tension. The heads of the 5 families were present, and at the center table, Dmitri Volkov sat like a king, drinking vodka. Salvatore Moretti was there, looking frail and defeated. He had played his part well. "So Salvatore," Volkov boomed, "I hear your son had a little accident in Queens this morning. Is he hiding?" "He is recovering," Salvatore said quietly. "Pity," Volkov laughed. "I was hoping to finish the job." The kitchen doors swung open. Elena walked out. She was wearing her uniform. She held a tray with a single covered dish. The room went quiet. Volkov's eyes narrowed. "The waitress. You're alive. You have 9 lives, girl." Elena walked straight to Volkov's table. She didn't shake. She didn't look down. "Dinner, Mr. Volkov," she said. "I didn't order," he sneered. "It's a specialty of the house," Elena said. "Compliments of Santino Vitale." She lifted the silver dome. On the plate there was no food. There was the cassette tape, and a single dead fish wrapped in a copy of the ledger page. Volkov's face went white. Elena stepped back and raised her voice, speaking clearly to the entire room. But she didn't speak English. She spoke the dialect, the language of the bosses. "Cistu elu cuntu, di lu traditore." This is the bill of the traitor. She pointed at Volkov. "This man is a rat. He sold you all to the FBI in '85. He killed Santino Vitale to hide his shame, and he has been stealing from your ports for 20 years. Volkov stood up, knocking his chair over. "She lies, kill her." His men reached for their guns, but suddenly the waiters at the surrounding tables dropped their trays. They pulled Uzi submachine guns from under their aprons. Lorenzo stepped out from the kitchen wearing a chef's coat, a shotgun in his hand. "Nobody moves," Lorenzo roared, "unless you want to die for a rat." Salvatore stood up. He picked up the ledger page from the plate. He put on his glasses. He read it in silence. Then he passed it to the Don of the Gambino family sitting nearby. The Gambino Don read it. He looked at Volkov. The look was not angry. It was disappointed, which was worse. Dmitri the Gambino Don said, "Is this your signature on the FBI informant document?" Volkov looked around. He was surrounded. The 5 families, the Morettis, and the girl. "It was business," Volkov screamed. "It was just business." "No," Salvatore said, walking up to him. He looked at Elena. "Elena, the knife." Elena picked up the steak knife from the table. She handed it to Salvatore. "For Santino," Salvatore whispered, but he didn't strike. He handed the knife to Elena. "Your blood," Salvatore said. "Your justice." Elena looked at the knife. Then she looked at Volkov, the man who had made her an orphan, the man who had forced her grandmother to live in fear. She drove the knife into the table, deep into the wood, inches from Volkov's hand. "I am not a butcher like you," Elena said, her voice ringing with power. "I am a Vitale. We don't kill rats. We let the cats have them." She turned to the other Dons. "He is yours." Elena turned her back on Volkov. As she walked toward Lorenzo, the room erupted in chaos behind her. She didn't look back. Lorenzo wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. "It's over." 3 months had passed since the night the knife was driven into the mahogany table, and the seasons in New York had turned. The biting cold of winter had thawed into a hopeful blooming spring. The Gilded Obsidian, much like the city itself, had undergone a transformation. The cold, intimidating atmosphere that once made it feel like a fortress had been stripped away. The dark, brooding velvet curtains were replaced with warm, amber-hued silk. The lighting was no longer interrogator stark, but soft and inviting. It was no longer a place where deals were made in the shadows. It was a place where people came to live. Elena sat at table 1, the king's table, as the staff used to whisper fearfully. Tonight, however, she wasn't polishing the silverware or nervously checking the water levels. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that draped over her frame like liquid moonlight, a stark contrast to the oversized uniform that had been her armor for so long. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy practical bun, fell in loose dark waves around her shoulders. She looked at her hands resting on the white tablecloth. They were the same hands that had kneaded dough and scrubbed floors, but now they didn't tremble. Lorenzo Moretti sat across from her. The change in him was even more profound than the renovation of the restaurant. The perpetual tension that used to tighten his jawline was gone. The shadows under his eyes had vanished. He looked younger, lighter, as if a heavy coat of armor had finally been unbuckled and cast aside. "You're staring at the kitchen again," Lorenzo said, a teasing smile playing on his lips. "Arthur isn't going to drop the tray. He's actually become quite competent since you stopped terrifying him." Elena laughed, a sound that felt free. "I'm not terrifying. I just have high standards for bread service. Old habits die hard." "Well, speaking of standards," Lorenzo said, his expression shifting to something more serious. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound legal folder. He slid it across the table, his fingers lingering on the cover for a moment, before pulling back. "The lawyers finished the audit of Santino's estate this morning. It took them weeks to untangle the web, but... Well, you need to see this." Elena hesitated. The estate Lorenzo, my father, lived in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens. His estate was a box of old vinyl records and a rusted Chevy. That was his cover, Elena. That was the mask he wore to keep you safe, Lorenzo explained softly. But Santino Vitale was the consigliere to the most powerful family in New York during the Golden Age, and he was smart. He knew a war was coming. He knew he might not survive it. Elena opened the folder. The pages were dense with legal jargon, bank routing numbers, and trust fund details. Her eyes scanned the columns, not fully comprehending the data, until she reached the summary at the bottom of the final page. She stopped breathing for a second. She blinked, assuming it was a mistake, a typo. She looked again. 50 million. She whispered, the number feeling foreign on her tongue. 52 million with interest, Lorenzo corrected gently. He had been funneling his share of the profits into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland since 1980. It was never for him. The trust was explicitly named the baker's daughter. "He saved every penny for you, Elena. You were never the poor waitress. Every night you served us water. You were technically the richest woman in the room." Elena stared at the document. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the numbers. It wasn't the money that overwhelmed her. It was the love. Her father hadn't just died for her. He had spent his life building a fortress of security she never knew existed. She slowly closed the folder and pushed it back toward Lorenzo. "I don't want it," she said, her voice steady. Lorenzo choked on his sip of wine, setting the glass down hard. "Excuse me, Elena, that is freedom. That is power. You could buy this entire city block." "It's blood money, Lorenzo," she said, shaking her head. "It came from a life that destroyed my family. I can't build a happy future on that kind of past." She looked him in the eye. "Take it. Give it to the families of the dock workers Volkov extorted. Build a school in the neighborhood I grew up in. Build a hospital. Wash the money clean by doing good with it." Lorenzo looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. He had seen women fight for diamonds, kill for status, and betray for much less. He had never seen someone hand back a kingdom because it felt too heavy. You really are a queen, he murmured. You'd give it all away. Not all of it. Elena said, a small nostalgic smile touching her lips. She tapped the folder. I saw a deed in there. A small property in Palermo. A vineyard with an old stone farmhouse. The ruin. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. It hasn't produced grapes in 20 years. It's dirt and rocks. It's soil, Elena corrected. My soil. I'll keep the vineyard. I need somewhere to bake bread, where the air smells like lemons and the sea. That is all I want. Lorenzo sat back, exhaling a long breath. He looked around the restaurant at the life he had built, and then back at the woman who had saved his soul. Well, he said, reaching into his pocket again. That actually complicates my plans. Or maybe it perfects them. He stood up. The movement was fluid, deliberate. He walked around the table, the chatter of the restaurant fading into a hush as guests realized something was happening. He stopped next to her chair. I've been meeting with the commission, Lorenzo said, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, but his eyes locked only on hers. I told them that the war is over, and I told them that the Prince of New York is retiring. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Retiring you, but this is your life. No, Lorenzo said, sinking down onto one knee. The restaurant went dead silent. Even the kitchen staff froze, peering through the service window. This was my duty. You are my life. He opened a small velvet box. Inside sat a diamond that was not flashy or modern. It was an antique and old European cut from the 1920s, set in platinum filigree. It was a ring that had survived wars just like them. I don't want to be a don anymore, Lorenzo said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to be a husband. I want to wake up in Palermo. I want to watch you bake bread, and I want to fix that ruined vineyard. Elena Vitale, will you let me serve you for the rest of my life? Elena looked down at the man who had jumped off a roof for her, the man who had taken a shotgun blast to shield her. She looked at the ring, and then at his eyes, dark, vulnerable, and completely hers. She didn't answer in English. It felt too small. She answered in the language of their ancestors, the language that had started it all. Tu sei l'aria ci respiro, she whispered, her voice trembling. You are the air I breathe. Is that a yes? Lorenzo asked, a grin breaking through his anxiety. Yes. She laughed, tears spilling over. Yes. Lorenzo slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood and pulled her into a kiss that sealed their future, a future not of guns and silence, but of sun, soil, and peace. The restaurant erupted. Applause thundered from the tables. Arthur was openly weeping into a napkin by the hostess stand. And at a corner table, Don Salvatore Moretti, the old lion, watched them. He didn't clap. He simply broke a piece of crusty bread, dipped it in olive oil, and raised it toward them in a silent toast. The cycle of blood was broken. The feast of life had finally begun. So the next time you overlook the quiet person, serving your coffee or cleaning your table, remember, Elena. Remember that the humblest exterior can hide the heart of a lioness and the blood of a queen. In a world of noise, sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that whispers in a language only the worthy can understand. Elena didn't just find love. She found her identity, her justice, and her legacy. She proved that true power isn't about demanding respect. It's about commanding it when the moment strikes. If you enjoyed this story of hidden identities, mafia justice, and forbidden romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with a friend who loves a dramatic twist, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Comment below. What would you do if you found out you were the heir to a secret fortune? I'll see you in the next video.